Hey everybody, welcome to our new food show, Crave. And today we got a great entrepreneur, Zach Neal, who is working with Cheech Marin and a couple other people to create Muncheechos. Tell us a little bit about how it got started and where did the name come from?
Sure. So it started, I really wanted to do something in the cannabis space
Mhm.
and food. And one of the common things you always hear about, people who use cannabis is they get the munchies. Hear these outlandish stories about all the different things that they want to eat, peanut butter and fudge ice cream with pickles and all these crazy cravings they get. And toning that down into like a realistic food menu, I thought there should be something really in California and New York and cities that have decriminalized marijuana, that there should be something that kind of speaks to the munchie culture.
Yeah.
And so that was my first thought. And then I pitched it to some of my partners and I thought this would be such a great idea. It's not a restaurant, it's a delivery service, because the whole idea is if you're stoned, you don't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So get the munchies brought to you, right? And everyone's like, oh, that's such a cool idea. How do you do it? And I was like, well, you'd have to have Cheech, right? You'd have to do either Cheech or Snoop Dogg, but I'd prefer Cheech.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of like, no one knew Cheech, and it was just kind of like this pipe dream. And so I created this whole deck. I came up with the name. I thought I'm going to make munchies with Cheech. I came up with the name Muncheechos, and I wrote like a mock recipe, and I came up with a logo, and I kind of put all this stuff together. And it turns out that one of my business partners, he's a lawyer. He has a client that he thought might know Cheech. And so a couple days later, he hit me back. Yes, this person actually does know Cheech. And I can get in touch with his manager, whatever. We'll set up a meeting. And so a day later, we were on the phone and I sent them the pitch deck and they said yes. So it was really just like this crazy thing where I created the product before I'd ever met the man. Pitched it to him and he said yes. And that was about a year and a half ago now. And he came and he came to one of my restaurants in LA and he had dinner and he wanted to make sure I wasn't like a psycho or something and that I could actually cook. And, we started brainstorming recipe ideas and what, really because in my opinion, and I think mostly people would agree, Cheech is kind of the godfather of cannabis culture. He's been luring us into it slowly, since the 70s. Yeah. And, really just having him as a partner legitimized the whole thing and really dialing in the menu and making sure that it was, we wanted it to be good food, not just food that's bad for you, but food that is good for you and munchy food and over the top indulging comfort food. And once we kind of nailed that down, then we were like, well, we're ready to open, but we're also in the middle of a pandemic. So we kind of had to bide our time a little bit and we opened later than we wanted to, but we felt it was the right time. And we found the right location in North Hollywood. Now we have a second location opening in Hollywood proper, and then we're going to go to New York. And it's kind of how it all started.
Oh, cool. And we'll get back to the pandemic issues on starting a restaurant later in the conversation, because I'm really curious about that, because starting a food show was the same thing. It was like, do we start it now or do we wait till everything opens up? But great idea with Cheech. So, I mean, Cheech and Chong were the godfathers of all this. I mean, and they've been the proponents since day one. And now that we're seeing a change in culture, and it's a perfect time for you to release this restaurant. What was it about coming up with the menu and coming up with some of the items on the food? You do mention that it's good food. Not only is it munchy food, but it's made in a way that's good for you as well.
Yeah, so everything on our menu is made from scratch. We don't use anything out of a can or a jar. So like even down to like we have pickled jalapenos. We pickle them ourselves. We take fresh jalapenos, we slice them, we make a brine, we soak them for 3 days. Like everything that is made from scratch. All of our sauces, all of our condiments, even our ranch dressing is made from scratch. We use, seasoning and sour cream. And so I wanted it to be a scratch kitchen. Our food was really being made from scratch and really being, as much organic produce as we can use, high grade meats. We're not using any cheap ingredients. We wanted everything to be really good. And then the second part to that was some people want comfort food, right? Some people want to indulge. They want a flaming hot Cheetos chicken cheesesteak at 2 a.m. And I want to be able to give that to them. But there's also a lot of food responsibility, people who are vegetarians or vegans or have restrictive diets and things. And so they should be able to participate as well. So most of our menu is available plant-based, vegetarian or vegan. There's a lot of dishes that are specifically geared towards vegetarian, plant-based, vegan. And there's also salads. I mean, there's stuff that is definitely not indulgent munchy food, but we have a good portion of that as well.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the menu. It's so diverse in the the offerings that you're giving to the patrons. It's really, you can pick from anything. And one thing that stood out when I looked at the Instagram and I was looking at pictures of the food, the one thing that stood out was the Nerdy Cola chicken. How did that come about? Because that just looks awesome. To be honest.
So I was remembering being a kid, and my brother was a huge pothead, and like it became like a known thing, and my parents were super mad. And anybody that was around in the 80s remembers like marijuana was treated like cocaine in the 80s. Yeah. Like if you caught with it, you were going to jail. It was dope. It was addictive. It was going to ruin your life. It was this big deal. And so I just kind of had this memory of being a kid in the 80s, a young kid. I was 7 or 8 years old, and like the Goonies and Cyndi Lauper and Duran Duran and like kind of like the whole new wave thing and like all of that together. And I thought, one of the things that was really popular in that time period were Nerds candy. Like Nerds were like crack. If you could get your hands on them, your friends would pay you to have some, and like cherry cola was like a new, excuse me, it was like a new concept at that point. And so I was like, I want to do something with chicken that is like a throwback to being like an 80s stoner. And like, imagine if we could make like a glaze out of cherry cola and then top it with Nerds. And so I started playing around by taking chicken thighs, just boneless, skinless chicken thighs, and cutting them up into kind of like bite-sized pieces. And then I was playing around with seasoning and herbs and using corn flour to kind of toss them in corn flour. And then I was frying them just to kind of get this I wanted a really crispy exterior, but a really moist and juicy interior. And chicken thighs are really good for that. The dark meat, there's a lot more fat content in a chicken thigh versus like a chicken breast. And so I accomplished getting this really crispy exterior, this really juicy interior. And then I wanted to dabble with how do I make a glaze that is going to be amazing for this? And so what I ended up doing was contacting a soda company that sells Coke products and actually buying the Coca-Cola syrup. So I actually just bought cherry cola syrup, and I used butter and I think some rosemary and some sage and some thyme to make it savory. And so I cooked down like a pound of butter and a couple cups of the soda syrup with herbs. And I kind of cooked that down and made it back into like this buttery, sweet and savory cherry cola reduction. And then I added a barbecue sauce to that. So we kind of tooled with an off the shelf barbecue sauce and added it to it. And the final product after a few tries was amazing. And it's like it's kind of like the Willy Wonka thing. You taste every bit coming through. So the aftertaste is like, oh my God, cherry cola, but also barbecue. And there's a little sweet from the soda syrup, but there's a savory from the herbs. And then so when it's done, you've got this crispy exterior, moist interior. It's glazed in this cherry cola barbecue. And then the final touch is we're sprinkling with Nerds candy. And people who have tried it have been like, I was hesitant because this seems real weird. It's chicken and candy, but after they have it, they're like, this somehow works amazingly, and it's amazing. So that was definitely one of my favorite dishes to work on. I feel like we knocked it out of the park. It really does work, and it's different. There's nothing else really like it. It's really awesome.
Yeah, because that's the one thing that it stood out to me. I was just like, dude, I've tried where people have tried infusing some type of candy into it, like Pop Rocks and stuff, and it just doesn't work. But right. This one with Nerds, I was like, wait, Nerds could actually work. It just, you don't get that crackle in your mouth or anything like that. It just goes in smooth. So that really stood out to me. The one thing I did want to do was talk to you about was the up and smoke, because you use not only cherry wood, but you had to use hemp wood to get the brisket tacos to really get that flavor. And then what was it about working with hemp wood for your brisket tacos?
So I ended up trying a bunch of different things. And initially what I was doing was I was just trying to make a reduction, which the first thing I'm just going to basically take a pan and I'm going to roast hemp and some cherry wood, and I'm going to keep adding water, and I'm just going to like cook this thing down, basically trying to make liquid smoke. Add that into a sauce. And then I thought, well, then maybe I'm going to use a smoker and I'm going to smoke the beef and try to get the smoke ring, but hemp burns up really quick. So it's like, it almost has to be an after finish. Then I used this tool called the smoking gun, which was after I smoked the meat with the cherry wood, then I would put it into a bag and I would use the smoking gun to just blast a bunch of hemp smoke in there and seal it tight and let it sit overnight. But I wasn't really getting the overall flavor that I wanted. So ultimately what I did is I bought a gigantic bag of hemp, like a 5-pound bag of hemp. And I ended up kind of going back to my original, which is where I cooked that hemp down, and I cooked it down, and I cooked it down, and I made basically my own liquid smoke. After I cooked it down, then I roasted it, and I kept adding water and reducing it. And then I used that as a base in the glaze that I put on the meat, and then I smoked the meat in the cherry wood, so that you're really picking up. Initially, it was just kind of, I wanted to just add that component in, because like, well, it's a cannabis brand. It would be cool if I used like hemp seed oil and maybe I smoke some things with hemp, but the practicality of getting that to work, it actually, the flavor profile is really cool. So it doesn't taste like hemp, but it adds this extra level of smokiness that you're not really sure where it's coming from. And I've had a couple of people say like, oh, the aftertaste, it's kind of like, it's a little herby. It kind of does, have that little aftertaste of like a little bit of herb. And I'm like, that's exactly what we wanted it to be. Not overpowering, just it's a part of the flavor profile.
Yeah, and it sounds like the infusions of what you've been using with the different flavor profiles has really been working well, especially from what your comments have been from the people who have tasted the food. It just sounds like it. And I haven't tasted the food yet. We're going to pretty soon.
Awesome.
And I'm just like, dude, this is something really, like, it's different. And that's what I like. It's adventurous when it comes to food. One thing I know people are going to ask, like, is there hemp in it? How am I going to get, how people are.
Yes.
It's just, so I have to ask the question, like, how is it infused? Is there something, is it a CBD product that's inside, CBD oil or anything like that that's infused into the meat, that are people, as older people would say, are they going to get a little baked or what? Explain to the people how it all works.
So there's actually no marijuana of any kind in any of the food. And so for people who are not familiar, hemp contains no THC. Hemp is, you could smoke 10,000 pounds of hemp, you'd never even get a buzz.
Yeah.
So, and hemp is used frequently in all kinds of protein shakes. And if you look at the back of a lot of your packages in your house, you'll see that there's hemp seed oil or hemp seeds or hemp. So hemp, the plant, has nothing really to do with with THC or anything like that. So we don't use any CBD. We don't use any of those infusions, primarily because it's still not food code.
Yeah.
So we can't use those products because it's illegal.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, we might offer a menu of like, we wanted to do some like healing CBD dressings for salads and things like that, more on like the healer side of things, like people that use marijuana or CBD products medicinally. But for now, really what the brand is about is, we feel that like marijuana has come to a point in the country now where it's, within the next 5 to 7 years, it's going to be looked at the same way that wine is. Wine growers and different vineyards, and it's celebrated, and there's different strains of grapes and the way that they make the wine and different types, and there's wine tastings, and wine is really has become so synonymous with food. It's a parable, right? So you're pairing your wine with your meal, and so this wine goes good with this fish, this wine goes good with this steak, this wine goes good with this pasta. And I feel that marijuana is having a moment, cannabis overall is having a moment where, just like they say a glass of red wine a day will lower your blood pressure, prevent heart disease, there's so much science behind what cannabis does for sickness. It heals the body, it regenerates cells, it's helpful with glaucoma, with cancer, with increasing appetite for people who have trouble eating. And so there's just so many uses. But on the other side, it's a natural antidepressant. It's a naturally non-addictive, non-harmful, natural way for people to relax, reduce stress, help with depression, with mental illness, so many different uses. And so there's a whole lifestyle, just like with wine or with craft beer, there's a whole lifestyle that goes with that. And so we wanted to be one of the first pioneers in taking cannabis as a culture and bringing it together with food and making those pairings. And so there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek jokiness to it because it's Cheech, and he's a comedian. And so it's, hey man, if you're stoned out of your mind, eat this cheesesteak, right? Have the magic mushroom cheesesteak. But to answer your question, there's no actual cannabis in any of the food. This is about pairings and about like a food brand that represents the lifestyle of cannabis users and across the spectrum, from your overall like potheads all the way down to your like recreational users, to your medicinal users that aren't even using THC, they're just using CBD as a part of their regimen. And so we want to have kind of options for all those people.
Yeah. And that's why I had to bring it up, because you know how people are.
Yes.
Sometimes we get a little leery, and we got to make sure we let people know, because the menu is something that you really got to try. I mean, I'm looking at it. I'm already waiting to try some of the food. I know we've already talked about it earlier that we're going to be tasting some of the food and really doing an in-depth with some of your chefs. But I'm just like, it's a great, great menu that it gets you excited to taste, and it gets you excited to look forward to. Um, so right now, Hollywood, North Hollywood is what you're looking at right now, and then you're going into New York, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. We're trying to really cover our bases on Los Angeles. And so our goal is to have 5 locations sometime in the next year so that we can cover all of Los Angeles County. Because the delivery radius is, they get a little weird. Our first thing was in North Hollywood, but that covers a lot of the valley and a lot of that area, but it doesn't get really into Hollywood. And so now opening this one in Hollywood will allow us to cover Hollywood and West Hollywood, and we'll get into Burbank, we'll get into Studio City, we'll get into those areas. And so then we want to branch out a little further so that we can hit like Woodland Hills and Sherman Oaks and Calabasas, and really just start branching out. And then hopefully Orange County in a wider spread. And then in New York, we're going to try to hit Brooklyn, the East Village, Upper East Side, Upper West Side. We're going to just try to get strategic locations in place so we can just get good coverage. We want to be, make it so that people can get it basically wherever they live in those cities.
Yeah. Because I'm hoping you're coming into the San Gabriel Valley, because that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
I'm in Pasadena Rosemead area, and I'm just like, shoot, how does this work for
to get
that food? So that's why I hopefully do, because I know the ghost kitchen that have been around the area have done very well in the East Side. So what was it like? And that's the one question I wanted to ask you. As of being a brick and mortar to a ghost kitchen, what has that experience been like for you?
I actually really like it, because initially I thought we were going to do ghost kitchens, where I was thinking I was going to have to sign 100 leases and rent kitchen space. And then it kind of hit me during the pandemic. Like, I would just see a lot of my peers in the restaurant industry doing so poorly. And I thought, and a lot of them, they don't have a model, like they can't deliver their food. These are fine dining establishments and places where it just doesn't translate. Like, someone will come into a restaurant that's fine dining and they'll spend $125 a person because they love the restaurant, they love the atmosphere, the whole experience. You're not going to most people are not going to spend $250 for 2 people on delivery. It just doesn't really size up. And so I just saw an opening for, rather than the ghost kitchen, why not the host kitchen? Why take established businesses that are already existing, they already have staff, they already have everything in place, and just say, hey, I'm going to give you my menu. I'm going to send my chefs to train you on the menu. I'm going to give you my order guides, my menu matrix, and all that stuff. And you just run this out of the back of your kitchen. You prepare the food and package it, and the delivery services pick it up. And for you guys, you keep the lion's share of the money, right? We can take a much smaller percentage and let you guys keep the majority of the money, which adds a revenue stream for these existing businesses. So now you can afford to make your payroll. You can give extra hours to your staff, because now maybe you normally close at 8 or 9, we're going to have you stay open till 12. You can send the front of house folks home. You can just keep a few cooks in the back and keep running this. And so that model became really cool, because now I feel like not only are we establishing a really cool brand, but we're also helping the industry that we're a part of. We're creating an opportunity for restaurants to just pick up extra revenue. And, this can be $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 a month in additional revenue for a restaurant, depending on their location, just for picking up, these additional hours and like running this model. So that's really what we're focused on now, is rather than trying to find ghost kitchens, we're looking for host kitchens and restaurants that want to add revenue to their business.
That's a great model, because I think that's what a lot of restaurants needed, was think out of the box. And that goes into the pandemic. We saw so many restaurants close, some great places and great eateries just couldn't make it. What has set you guys apart? Because it's like you've had this career in this industry for some time, and you've been able to survive. What was it that helped you that maybe will help other restaurants to be able, especially with this model? I think it's a great model to help others.
So I think there's two, for me, there's always been 2 fundamentals in restaurants. Restaurants, as everyone knows, is a very tough business. And I always tell people, if you want to be rich, restaurants are not usually your path. But there is a way to be very successful financially in restaurants, and it's a twofold thing. One is try not to use credit. When you open a restaurant, every food purveyor, US Foods and Cisco, and all these people approach you, and the liquor companies approach you, and the wine companies approach you, and everybody wants to extend terms. They want to give you net 30 or net 45-day terms, which means you can spend whatever you want, and the bill comes due every month and a half. Yeah. And that seems like a really plausible way, like, oh, well, this is good because I don't have to pay it. And then, what happens is you have a slow month and the bills come due and you can't pay them. And then you get put on COD and you can't order food until you pay the other balance off. And across the board, you go into massive amounts of debt. So one of the things that, and to be, completely honest, the first few restaurants I didn't do so well. And I've had some failures along the way, which is how I kind of learned what you shouldn't open a restaurant unless you have the capital to actually open and run your restaurant for at least 6 months. You need 6 months of operating capital, which means probably spend less on rent, try to find better locations that are lower rent, spend less on all the things that you think you need, you probably don't need. That like really expensive wall mural that you're going to have the local artist paint for 10 grand, like you don't need it. What you need to focus on is your menu, a quality product, and points of service, making sure your service is impeccable and your product is really good. And just, if you have the dream of getting into restauranting, you got to watch the credit. So I run my businesses on, if we can't afford it, we don't have it. We don't use credit. We don't use credit cards. We don't have loans. We don't use terms. We pay all of our distributors, we pay, then you deliver it. So we know that what we have, we own. So that's been one really good thing for kind of surviving the restaurant industry and saving. In your busy season, try to save, we save 15% of our revenue during our busy season. That helps us get through our slow season. So it's been a lot of financial planning. And look, it took years to figure this out. My first restaurant was like everybody else. I started upside down. I was in debt. I was, really in trouble by month 4. And that restaurant only lasted 9 months. So it was like, it was open and it was closed. The food was great. People had a good time, but I was way overextended. Now I try to run on really lean budgets. I try to focus on what matters, which is customer experience and quality of product, and staying off of credit. And then the second thing for kind of like the ghost kitchen or host kitchen model, I think that the pandemic taught us one thing for sure, is that people will never stop going out to eat, no matter what. We were in the middle of a pandemic, and as soon as the doors opened, we were full. As long as the fire, food, and alcohol, people will gather together around those things. But there is just a huge market for people who don't want to cook, but they don't want to go out either. And so pizza shops and Chinese restaurants have known this for decades. They've been, king of the delivery business. But now there's more about, people are also looking for experiential dining at home. So I think the way you win in that space is by offering something different. Like if there's 100 restaurants in your city that all deliver wings, opening a wing delivery service probably isn't the best idea. What the best idea would be coming up with something original and unique. And that could be from the type of food you're serving, to the way you're packaging it, to the things, the tools and gadgets that come with it, or how it's eaten, or figuring out that loophole and like being able to deliver things that normally aren't deliverable. And I think that's with Muncheechos, why we'll be successful, is because we've tapped into a thing. And so we're not really competing with a lot of the other restaurants, because we've made our menu diversified in a way that makes it, even if you don't care about cannabis, the menu itself is great. But also we've tapped a nerve with, this is kind of like a cult thing. Like, hey, if you like cannabis, you should try this restaurant because it was built for you. So we're kind of having like a little niche thing that we're working on there. And so I think that that's the way to be successful. And my advice to other restaurateurs that are thinking about getting into the delivery game, it's pretty easy. Just go on Grubhub, Uber Eats, and look for what's not represented. What don't they have? Or what do they have very little of? And then also look at the delivery hours. Like a lot of these restaurants cut at 10 o'clock. And we know that there's a lot of people that get hungry after 10. So if you can be like the one Chinese restaurant that delivers till 12, in those extra 2 hours over the course of a year, you will make a lot of extra money just by being the one thing that's still operating. Or maybe, there's not a lot of, I know there's not a lot of breakfast options in a lot of these cities. You can't get a good breakfast delivered at 9 a.m. So if I owned a little cafe, I'd start delivering breakfast at 7 in the morning. I'd be done by 11, 7 to 11 in the morning, and wrapped for the day. I'd have my cafe deliver, hearty breakfast, eggs and bacon, all the stuff people want. So just some things like that would be my overall advice.
Awesome. Zach, thank you so much for being a part of this and talking about Muncheechos and the business of food. I know LA has become such a big food culture, and though we took a pause because of the pandemic, it looks like it's roaring back with a lot of food festivals opening up again, and
Yeah.
places like yours with Muncheechos. I think it's going to be a great success. How can people order your food?
So we are available on Grubhub, DoorDash, Seamless, pretty much all of the major delivery outlets we're through. And then in doubt of that, you can always just go to like our website or our Instagram and just click on the order now button, and it'll pull up what's available in your area. And if it's not available in your area, message us. Oh, if you notice that we're not available in your area, message us and we'll be happy to look into your area and see if we can get something open. And if there's any restaurants watching this and you want to become a partner, send us a message. You can contact us right from Instagram or from our website.
Awesome. Zach, thank you so much again. Hope everybody winds up ordering some food because it looks like a great menu. I can hardly wait to order some food and taste it. Thank you so much again, and we can't wait to talk to you really soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem.